All right, enough fooling around. No more foreplay. All right. Welcome to another film Flashback. It's Matthew, as always, joined by Nick. And finally, we've got our good buddy, Matt Hudacs, to join us.
Thank you very much.
What
Thank
a gentleman.
you. I tried. I thought, let's see what we can do in a tuxedo like James Bond. It's actually very difficult to do anything.
Well, hopefully sitting still and talking about a film from the 90s. It's not
Jumping jacks, not ideal.
Not
Talking
ideal.
in front of a camera, not the worst.
It's not. It's good. It's all right.
So as you might know, we've decided this time we're going to flashback to a movie from when we were all just fresh boys in the mid-90s. It's 1995's James Bond, Goldeneye. And this was exciting because when this movie came out in 1995, it was kind of a bit of a rebirth of the Bond franchise. At least that's how they were trying to bill it. So this is the first time Pierce Brosnan shows up as the title role of Bond. It's the first time you have Dame Judi Dench as M. And it was an attempt to kind of inject a little bit of life into a franchise that people were worried might have been something that was dead and a relic. And I think that this movie, and along with its success and the success of the song and the success of the video game that was for N64, you can really see that it worked. And Bond came back after this and is still going today. Did you guys remember when this movie came out? I mean, we were all pretty young.
I do remember, and I did watch the trailer again to refresh my memory of it. But it was mostly from the game that I remember it.
Yeah, so I was 11 or 12 when this came out, and that game had such a I do remember the movie, and I remember the BMW in the movie. I remember wanting it, even though I couldn't drive. But the game I played up through college, and like I have such a to this day, it's one of the best multiplayer fighting games of all, not fighting game, multiplayer video games, period, of all time. Like we played it in college, and I was like, that was 10 years plus about 10 years after it came out.
When was the last time you played it?
Not recent enough.
Okay.
I played it a year and a half ago when I was back home for Christmas. We pulled out the Nintendo 64, and it was one of the like 10 games we had, and we were like, well, this one's going in. It's incredible to look at what passed for high level.
Oh, definitely.
Gameplay and high level effect, graphics and the rest of that. Because games that we played before that were very rarely were they the first person shooters.
No, it was like Doom or
for the PC.
like Duke Nukem.
Well, you had them, but you didn't have one where 4 people could play at the same time. That was a big difference with this, and
against
so
each other,
and so you're playing against, and then there would be rules. It's the first time where it's like, all right, there's got to be rules. No odd job. Screen.
Why? I loved Odd Job.
Because he's not even. All right, so let's get back to the movie. He's not even in the movie. Why is he in that game? It's unfair that he's in that game. He's impossible to shoot. You got to duck to shoot him. Like Odd Job should not be in that game. I'm gonna call Capcom or whoever made that thing. That's the only bad thing about that entire game is Odd Job.
So obviously, if you're people like us who were just like young and teenagers and grade school in the 90s, the game is actually like almost more memorable than the movie. So it's fascinating to go watch it. I think for all three of us, I'll say, is we're watching the game and we're going, we remember this moment from the game as we're watching the movie. We're like, oh yeah, I remember I used to hide out there, and oh yeah, I used to use those mines, the timed mines, and it's but when the movie begins, it's a Bond movie, so it's got a lot of the things that you're used to and the things that, and it has to, there's a checklist when you make a Bond movie. He has to say this kind of thing. He has to have this kind of woman. So the first thing that really kicks it off is, I think, one of the most effective pre-title action sequences like that in action movie history. Before you get the iconic title sequence, you get just him diving off the Hoover Dam, which was apparently the largest bungee jump in movie history. It was like 700 100 feet. And that's the best thing about watching these 90s movies is how much of it they do for real, you know?
Yeah.
Oh, absolutely.
Right, that's a good point. So you're talking about 90s movies. And to me, this is like, Pierce Brosnan is my James Bond. Okay, like when I think of James Bond, the first person I think of is Pierce Brosnan. Okay. Everything else, I was very young when the others came out, not born for the majority of them. So like Sean Connery was never, I saw those down the road. My dad'd be like, oh, you got to watch this James Bond. But this was my James Bond movie. And so I was watching this one, and it was the longest gap between the release of James Bond movies. And so I'm going like, okay, so they had some time there to like, feel the room out and see. So I pulled a list. I'm like, this is very like, not only is it's a James Bond movie, it's very 90s, like 90s action. And so I pulled up other 1995 action movies. You want to hear them?
Yeah.
So these are other action movies that came out in 1995. Bad Boys, Die Hard, Assassins, Desperado, Judge Dredd, one of my personal favorites, Waterworld. And so this movie was so 90s that when the original script came out, they thought it was way too similar to True Lies. So they were doing rewrites on set while filming it. So like everyone knew what was selling. Everyone wanted to make the same movie because the plot in this movie is not, there's one twist. Like there's more twists in the first 5 minutes of the Mission Impossible reboot than there is this entire movie. There's one twist and it happens like in the first act with Sean Bean.
Absolutely.
Yeah, so Hudacs, you're a bit of a Bond fan, aren't you?
I am.
You could say that.
Is that your number?
What gave that away?
Well, you're also just plain theatrical, so I don't know. Maybe if we had done Return of the Jedi, you'd be dressed up like an Ewok. I don't know.
Maybe you should ask me back.
So he says that when this is his Bond. When he thinks of Bond, he thinks of Pierce Brosnan. But who do you think of? Do you appreciate Brosnan's face?
So it's funny that Nick brings that up because before this was Timothy Dalton, who everybody believes is the closest to the original book James Bond. But nobody in film liked Timothy Dalton. And they've been trying, even before Roger Moore, to get Timothy Dalton, and he just was not available. So I never watched any of the Pierce Brosnan. I did watch Daniel Craig. I did watch Roger Moore, and I did watch Sean Connery. I didn't watch the one with Larenby, but I do have to say, what was that?
Sorry, Lazenby, George Lazenby.
There must be another guy. So
nobody gets your jokes.
So I have to say, Pierce Brosnan did do a great job holding up. I think he was way better than Roger Moore. And I think he did bring the same kind of a class that Sean Connery brought to it. So, yeah, I would agree with Nick that Pierce Brosnan is a really, really good, but I do enjoy what Daniel Craig is doing with the character.
Yeah. So I was looking at Pierce Brosnan's credits prior to this movie, and there's nothing stands out to me except Mrs. Doubtfire,
which was
Remington Steele, man.
Robinson Crusoe. In fact, when he announced that he was going to be Bond, he had a beard. And I guess just like the LA Lakers, you can't have facial hair as a Bond. So he filmed Robinson Crusoe. I think that's the Yankees. Is that the Yankees?
Must be some other team.
All I know is Steve Nash had to cut his hair.
It doesn't matter.
But
check your source.
This is why I'm theatrical, not sportsical. So the point being that watching him as James Bond, I totally understood why Sally Field in Mrs. Doubtfire was so conflicted between Robin Williams or James Bond. I would be confused too.
Yeah, he's for real. I think he's got the right balance of when he needs to look like he's fun and relaxed, then he looks totally fun and relaxed. But when he also needs to look like he's on a rampage and actually hurting people, he looks very serious. So like in order to play Bond, you need to do both things. You need to be like, and sometimes switching the gears in a car, like real fast, go from cool and calm to, totally focused and hurting people. So it's I believe it when he takes people out. It looks very convincing stuff. I really enjoyed that this movie was acted, I would say, well across the board. We have like a nice list. We've got like a buffet of great villains to enjoy.
Yeah.
You've got Alan Cumming playing Boris the programmer. You've got Famke as like the hottest damn Russian villain
who crushes you with her legs. Yeah.
Oh yeah, Oramov is great. I mean, even though Mishkin's not a villain, I really enjoyed Defense Minister Mishkin. I enjoyed everybody. I thought was just superbly cast.
But who steals the whole thing? Dame Judi Dench. This is her first film. People were worried about how
does she steal it though?
First film as
M.
Not her first film in general.
Oh no, of course it's not her first film, but it's her first film as M.
Yeah.
And I think she knocks it out of the park. She has a steely gaze that made somebody apologize for doing nothing.
Yeah, pretty much.
Well, she's only got one scene, right? So if you're going to show how important someone is in, 2 scenes? She's got that scene at like right at the beginning of the second act, whatever it is. She's not she's not like a main character in this movie. I don't know how you would possibly say that she steals the movie. Seems a little strong.
That seems no. I think she does. I think she solidly comes in, puts James Bond in his place, in his box, just like any boss would come in.
But that's what
that's job.
What M's function is. They're there to humanize James Bond and to like sort of set it up, which she does. One of the things that I think is interesting about this particular Bond, we were talking about how it was like a rebirth, and so if you can just take yourself and transport back to the 90s, you realize that at that time, culturally speaking, Bond was feeling very dated as a character and as a genre. And there were things that were changing culturally that people were like, I don't know if maybe Bond should be left behind. And so what they did is, instead of changing the character totally, they just put some good lines in there for people such as M, because this is the first time a woman plays M. And they give Judi Dench, but they also give Moneypenny and other characters some good lines, mostly the women, to look Bond in the face and tell him things like, she calls him a misogynist dinosaur and a relic of the Cold War in the movie. That's not like it's not a criticism like that comes out later in the newspaper. That's M just looks him in the eye and calls him that.
Absolutely.
Moneypenny goes, I'm pretty sure this is sexual harassment. Which is what
Moneypenny is always like that, though. Throughout all of the James Bonds, there's always a flirtiness to it, but she knows that there's a line with it. In fact, in preparation for this, I watched License to Kill, and Timothy Dalton, they're literally at a wedding, and he's making out with the bride, and the groom walks in and is like, "Oh, James, yo!" He's like, "Oh, I'm sorry. Oh, I didn't."
It's just James being James.
It's just James being James. But like Moneypenny has always been a flirtatious thing with them, and she draws a line. She always draws the line.
She uses the term sexual harassment. So like in the 80s, the term wouldn't have made it in the Bond movie, but this is 1995.
But you know what?
So they're just going to say that they know the audience is already
in the 60s with Sean Connery. It's marriage. She always brings up marriage to get James Bond to leave.
Yeah, exactly.
I think it's interesting. So back to the Pierce Brosnan as James Bond. There's been some really great James Bonds, like a fraternity of actors who have been it.
Absolutely.
Did you guys look and see who else was considered when Pierce Brosnan came on?
Yeah, Mel Gibson.
Yeah, Liam Neeson. I can kind of see Liam Neeson. Mel Gibson, though. I don't know. Hugh Grant. Some of these guys like, well, he's British.
I'm James Bond.
Yeah,
Mel Gibson doing like a proper English accent. That'd have been excellent.
Now, also, Pierce Brosnan is one of two Bonds that were not actually born in England.
Yeah.
Laresby was born in Australia, and Pierce Brosnan was born in Ireland.
Great. I see you also read the same fact online as I did. So another fun thing I saw.
As far as action movies. No, go on, Nick.
I was gonna say I thought it was funny. So like this is not too far from like all the 80s and all the issues we had with Russia. This was the first Bond movie to actually shoot in Russia, and none of the principal actors that are playing Russians are Russian. And so I'm picturing like the producers are calling like places in Russia. They're like, yeah, we're gonna do the new James Bond movie in Russia. Is that cool? And they're like, oh yes, very cool. You're not going to make fun of Russians? And like, no. They like totally argoed their way into shooting in Russia, and like, they're gonna make the Russians the bad guys.
Well, I think that's part of why they created the story the way it does. So the way that this plot works out is that at the beginning you have this super weapon that was a holdover from the Cold War that's been supposedly hidden, but you have rogues, not actual representatives of the Russian government, but a couple of people go rogue and they steal this weapon. The weapon's called Goldeneye. And so the Russian government isn't at fault. The Russian government, like, you have Defense Minister Mishkin's trying to like stop it and getting in there. So it's like, it doesn't necessarily make Russians look bad unless you count the whole background of the story where it was like in 1945 in Stalinist Soviet Union, what they did to the Leon's Cossacks. But like the Russian country itself doesn't come out looking bad because the villains are rogue actors who are like going off the map.
From where?
And they're defying everybody. From where? Well, the Trevelyan's not from Russia. I mean, his family was Leon's Cossack, but he's from England. But it's like they were Ukrainians?
At the time, it was part of Russia.
Yeah.
But I love the two. I guess we have the Bond girl and then the femme fatale. I actually don't have their names in front of me, but Natalia was one who I really liked.
And Onatop.
Yeah, the hottest computer programmer in the entire world.
It's Isabella Scorupco.
Yeah.
Yeah, dude. Even as a kid, I was like, whoa.
Yeah.
And then wait a minute. Alan Cumming looks like he belongs in that role.
That he was. And can we talk about the spa scene?
Go right ahead.
Man. That's one of maybe the only scenes that wasn't in the video game. That's maybe why when I saw it.
Yeah, you would have had to hack your N64 to get that.
That ain't going on Nintendo.
Bond makes Bond is
a lot of cheat codes.
You know what always gets me about one of the things that I love about a good Bond movie is that it's got everything about it that is like Hollywood with big scare quotes, where it's like things like the cars never get dirty even though they go like traipsing through fields, and one of those funny things is he's in like a hotel pool that's shaped like an octagon and is empty. Have you ever seen a hotel pool where it's gorgeous and there's nobody in it? And he's like, oh, I'm just alone. And then she comes in. Well, he finds her. He hears her coming. And they have this insane fight in the spa where they're basically half nude. He's in like a towel. It's so over the top because she kills people by squeezing them to death with her thighs. Yeah. And it's like, if it wasn't Bond and you pitched these ideas, people would say, get out of my office. But because it's Bond, you're allowed to do it. And you're encouraged.
Yeah.
It never worked well with Sherlock Holmes. Yeah.
And yeah, I noticed that too. There's a scene where he gets shot in the neck with a dart, and then all of a sudden he's in jail with Natalia. He looks like he like just got out of the shower, and like, looks like it took him 2 hours to get ready. He's got his suit, looks perfect, and like the first thing I look at is like the collar of a white shirt. Nothing shows you how disheveled someone is, as if they've been wearing a white dress shirt for like over 8 hours, and he's got this like perfect thing. But like that's how we used to like our heroes.
At the very beginning of the movie, when they're like in that mission control center, the one other agent who's there, he's disheveled. He's got his tie undone, and it's like this ugly tie and like a blue coat and stuff. And I'm just like, he hasn't been doing anything. He's just at work. But Bond will go blow up a train, and still his hair's perfect. I was watching this movie, and I'm like, I find it hard to believe that after all this adventuring, their breath is still crisp and fresh enough to be able to be that close to each other.
I think, you know what? You know who I thought when I saw the other disheveled spy was Gil from The Simpsons. Old Gil. Can't catch a break. He's like double, 99 or something. He's like always on his way out.
The bloody hell was that? Oh, yeah. So we also have a Joe Don Baker in this movie as the CIA agent playing he's a caricature of an American,
Yeah.
It's like he's from Texas, and he's got a big old gut, and he just yells a lot, and he's always calling James Bond Jimmy and Jimbo, and he just like refuses to. He calls James Bond a stiff ass Brit, and it's like, again, this is just an insane caricature, but it's James Bond. If he wasn't like that, it wouldn't be fun.
I feel like it's like, hey y'all, I'm from America. That's like just your generic. How they look like, oh yeah, they're all obnoxious and loud like that.
Yeah.
Playing a CIA agent who doesn't want to follow any protocol, because that's how CIA agents work,
Yeah.
It's
but
like,
then
you guys with secret codes and your passwords. It's like,
but then organized enough to have him land in the middle of his squad at the end there.
Well,
I don't see him. Oh, I'm sorry.
So when Clay, you're talking about the car not getting dirty, and one of the things that I remember besides the video game for this movie, the marketing must have been fantastic, because I remember that, and I still remember the BMW that he drove. And so I looked in a little more to the BMW. So for that product placement, there was a book that came out a while back that just all it was about is product placement. We could put the name in the notes or whatever, but BMW paid the James Bond film $3 million to use their new BMW prototype, and they estimate off using that BMW in this movie that they did over 300 million in sales because of that car.
Ordering it before it was even out because they saw it in the movie.
But that is also the point of the James Bond franchise, is when a James Bond comes out, you look at what's the car, what's the gadgets, what's the watch. There were scenes of him like waking up in that train where it's just him like, oh, what time is it? Oh, and they're looking at their watches like,
Trevelyan compares it so you get both of them.
Yeah, like, oh, you have the newest model.
Oh, new model.
Yeah.
And then so I was thinking, so the other major product placement I noticed is there's a badass tank scene. It's like a chase scene with a tank. That's amazing. And then at the end of it, there's like a ton of Perrier. Just like he rose over like a. Yeah, and so these Perrier cans are going everywhere. I'm like, I wonder, like, comparatively how much the Perrier goes. And so then I was thinking, and I have no idea if they've done this or if they would do this, but can you imagine that they would sell to an extent where, like, let's say the movie that comes out, I don't know if it's this year or next year, but it's like, yes, I like Tito's and a straight up Tito's martini. Or like a Svedka martini, they totally sell out on the vodka, because like the price on whatever vodka he drinks would have to be astronomically high for a sponsorship.
Oh yeah.
So I really enjoyed that when it came to the plotting of the story, that they set it up at the beginning. In the opening scene, you see Bond working with Alec Trevelyan, 006, and Trevelyan dies, apparently. He's shot in the head by the villain. And then then we have a mysterious other character with a new name. And I like that they didn't try to wait until the end of the movie to reveal that mysterious character was Alec. I looked up when he reveals himself, when he steps out of the shadows for the second time.
Twice.
And I looked at it, it's the midpoint. And it's like, oh, that's cool, because there's still more story left to be happening. It's actually mostly a big character moment for Bond, because now Bond has a face and a name to put on his adversary, not just sort of like just another person, just another terrorist, or just another dictator. And it's like, oh, so we're actually trying to tell a story with a little depth for Bond. And that normally wasn't the case before. I mean, maybe later on they continued to make movies like that. They talk about the Daniel Craig movies, but in 95, they were really trying to make this a more personal kind of Bond.
They were, and they even when when Sean Bean comes out of the shadows the second time, he even is talking about his childhood and James and saying like, we were both orphans. Neither of us knew our parents and stuff. And I think that's the first hint of James's background.
That his parents died in a climbing accident.
Yeah. So it's more history. It's more like putting kind of James Bond into his place, which up to this point, you always just kind of thought like, oh, James Bond is this guy. Okay, now we kill him off. It's kind of the same feeling that I imagine people who watch Doctor Who get. Like, oh, it's a new doctor, but it's like it's the same doctor.
Yeah, I would imagine there might have been some more backstory on Trevelyan, Sean Bean's character, that got cut for time. This movie's 2 hours, which in the 90s for an action movie it's a little long.
Yeah.
And this is one of also 21 films that Sean Bean has died in as of 2019, by the way. And he almost died twice in this one.
He almost died twice. At the end.
But I didn't. Okay, so like most everything I get, and like there's different choices, and a lot of it go, yeah, that's 90s. But why did he come out of the shadows twice? The first one, it's like a big reveal. And it's like, it's Sean Bean. Like, was he that big then? Maybe he was. I don't know. I don't remember how big Sean Bean was. Remember, like, okay, this is a guy who's just another white guy who looks very similar to all the other guys. And then the second time, I'm like, oh, I guess that's just his thing, man. Imagine I have a friend like that every time you see him, he's like,
you just
comes out of the shadow. Yeah.
Well, the first time he pulls up his Walther, and he's got I love that they got the classic movie silencers where the gunshot just sounds like, you know, you're dropping a pebble in a pond. Like, but he pulls out his gun, and he's screaming in Russian. And so stepping out of the shadows is a reveal that he's not a villain when you thought he was. And then the second time, it's kind of the reverse, where you knew he was a villain, and he steps out of the shadows to reveal he's actually 006. So it's kind of just like mirrored images things. But it is kind of funny that they used the same device twice. But I mean,
look, copy and paste is a great thing.
You know, I think
that was very 90s to copy and
this is I could be missing one, but I think chronologically this is the first movie I remember specifically that used a silencer. And I know Assassins that came out this year had a silencer, but it like became the thing where like if you were playing like a video game that had the option, you wanted the silencer, you wanted the stealth. And you know what I was thinking too about, we're talking about the plot and about the True Lies, how it's like they had to change the plot. It almost makes me think, if you're doing a spy movie about one guy, they've done so many James Bonds. Like at what point does it get to be The Simpsons where you're like, well, oh, you're doing a spy movie? Yeah, no, it's James Bond's already done that. Like that's 1986 or like all these things. So like it doesn't surprise me whatsoever that the script was exactly the same as True Lies.
Well, they have a problem when they make the Bond movies of trying to copy themselves.
Yeah.
Well, because if you don't put in certain stuff, then it doesn't feel like a Bond movie. But if you do it exactly the same, then it's boring. So it's like they can't. Whenever they change it a little bit too much, then people get annoyed that it's different. And so I don't know, like if somebody came to you and was like, you know, if you were already a successful director, people were like, do you want to direct James Bond? You might say no, because you're like, this is like lose-lose. It's really
kind of like Star Wars, you know?
Absolutely. I think it is. Like, it does have such a prestige to it that it can be a career builder or a career ender if you step into this role. Like, if, what else did Roger Moore do after 007? It could completely destroy your career if people just don't, like, they only see you as that. And I think Pierce Brosnan is besides Sean Connery, but leaving him out of it, I think he's the most successful Bond, pre and post Bond.
Well, this movie I really like. The other ones, the other Pierce Brosnan movies, they go to being pretty silly.
Yeah,
I don't
have a fond memory of the next three.
Because again, like, I think it's the 90s, and I'm sure the little paperclip fell down and was like, oh, it looks like you're writing a Bond script.
Bond movie.
Would you like to insert a lot of vagina here? Yeah. No, it's more.
Yeah.
But you're right. In writing a Bond movie, there are the one-liners that you have to hit. Bond, James Bond, shaken not stirred, and then as many like pickup lines as you can do. And I think one of my favorites in Goldeneye was in the sauna when she's like, "You don't need the gun," and he's like, "Well, that depends on your definition of safe sex." I was like, exactly. He's right, but also hot at the same time.
I was curious listening to it because I'm sure they had there's probably 10 other lines that had in there that were just as cheesy. We were going back and forth about the scenes with Q, and I'm watching this movie and I'm going like, okay, so here's a bunch of you're getting the scene with Q about the gadgets. Like, if I'm writing this script, I get to that scene and I do. Matt Hudacs is famous for this, by the way. Leaving it totally blank for 8 pages. I'm gonna write the end of the. I'm gonna say insert Q scene. I'm gonna get to the end of the movie, figure out what I need to solve this thing, and then come back and it's it's a button that turns into a bee, and he's allergic to bees, and come up with this crap, and I'm gonna put it all in that scene. And then everything that you put in there pays off at the end. They totally reverse engineer the whole thing.
Did he end up using the rockets in the car?
No. Weirdly, right? And
he didn't even really drive the car.
I think it's because that car wasn't out yet. And so that BMW made one of them, and they were like, we don't want you using it in action scenes because we can't have you wrecking this car.
If you don't want you to damage the car.
I love at the end of Q's scene, there's the joke, the button on the end of the scene is you've got Pierce Brosnan Bond picks up this massive sandwich and Q grabs it and goes, "Don't touch that." And it's like, "Oh, what is it? Is it a bomb?" He's like, "That's my lunch." And it's like, haha. But I'm like, "That's your lunch? That's enough food for 4 days."
Where does he hide it?
It's the biggest. Dude's got a 6-foot hoagie.
So the BMW car was the only one so there's another opening scene. Who's with? He's racing the Russian girl. She's got a Lambo.
No, she's got a Ferrari.
A Ferrari. So during that beginning Act 1 chase scene, they actually wrecked the Ferrari, and there was $80,000 worth of damages. So I'm sure if BMW wasn't already you know what, let's just take it easy. They're probably please don't drive the BMW. That's bad.
We have one. There's one of them.
Yeah.
I like that. So when you're talking about a Bond movie, they just sometimes the plot, like you were saying, feels a little simple, but this wasn't totally simple. It was just that they just kept everything's a set piece for the next action moment. And so we have this is all over the world. We're in this exotic Mediterranean, and then we're also in Siberia, and then we also end up in Cuba, and it was kind of just we're just kind of want to move around to get to the next great action scene. And nobody should care about that, because if you didn't like that, then you shouldn't have bothered watching a James Bond movie.
Oh, absolutely. When it comes to a James Bond film, this is not a movie where you sit there and think about everything. You think about it's Russians in Cuba and everything's written in English. You don't think about that. You have to turn your brain off. Like any Fast and Furious franchise, like any Liam Neeson movie, or any Transporter series. You just turn your brain off, and it's way more enjoyable.
Oh, that's what you do for Schindler's List?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Way more enjoyable. Laugh riot.
I definitely feel like I've always said the same word. Movie reviews should be tiered based on like a kid's movie. Like the same people that rate Oscar movies, a lot of times rate Trolls 2 or something. It's like, well, should they be on the same scale? Probably not, because though the plot is not like, we said it's pretty simple, but like it gives you all the things you want to see. If you go to see a James Bond movie, and Clay mentioned it, if you change too much, people are going to hate it. If you don't change enough, people are going to say this is stale. I've already seen this, 100 times. And so it's finding that like right area. You want people, regardless of how great the plot is, he's going to get the girl at the end. There's going to be multiple. He's going to get all of them. He's going to drive a fancy car, wear nice things. He's going to not get his ass kicked. Like, you're going to walk out of the theater going like, yeah, that was a James Bond movie. And like, you know what? I knew what I was getting. Was it like, Shawshank Redemption? No, but it was a good James Bond movie. And you walk out probably feeling pretty good about it, I would imagine.
It's one of the more fun things watching the movie now that it's 2020 and this movie is 25 years old is the tech. There's all this awesome 90s tech, which is just, and it's like the movie's not that old, but tech is the thing that ages the fastest. So like, what a great time to be a Hollywood screenwriter in the mid 90s when people knew about computers, but nobody was good at them yet, so you could just make stuff up. You're like, oh, well, I'm a hacker, and you just see them just clacking away on a keyboard, and he just sends like, I've got spikes, and he's just spike them. And I love that his passwords are all innuendos too. So his passwords are things like, oh, it's like chair, or it's knockers and stuff. And my first thought was, those passwords are shit passwords. Like if you try to sign up for like an email account now, they'd be like, I'm sorry, must contain one number and a capital letter.
He's like, all right, shared exclamation point.
Like, I'm sorry, must be at least 8 characters. Chair does not qualify. Does not.
And
chair, $,
yeah, well, that and like how large the font was on all the computers was distracting to me. Like, I joke these days, like, that's how big my dad's font is on his iPhone. Like it's massive. Imagine working at like a it was not CIA, but like doing anything that you would want to be secure or private, and your font is that size. Like, come on, like it's ridiculous. Like every computer, you can read it from across the room.
So that's the computers that they have, and yet James Bond takes pictures with his binoculars and then gets them printed out at his car. And they're like, oh, all right. Oh, and I got a text from Moneypenny. Oh, read it.
And when they're looking at the satellite image, is one of my favorite things that they had to stop doing in movies. They're looking at the satellite image of the Severnaya complex, and they see the world's blurriest, fuzzy, pixelated image of it, and then they're like, enhance. And it just gets clearer and clearer and clearer, and then they're like, not only can we tell it's a helicopter, we can tell it's this exact prototype helicopter. Just like, oh yeah, but everyone's like, wait a minute, photos don't work that way. When I blow my photo up on my phone, it doesn't look clear. Right? You're right. I love that she literally hacks into the mainframe. You never hear about mainframes except in movies.
I was just thinking right now about the tech, and like the tech definitely gets dated. The only thing there's 2 things I guess that don't. One is the ensemble, the attire, because it's still to this day like a classic look. And 2, the cars. Like imagine he's driving like a Prius, like it's more advanced, sure, than like Aston Martin. I'm sure it's more economical, and there's probably more features. But like,
do you see the car they gave Joe Don Baker's character? He's got this little golf cart that doesn't run, and he has to whack it with a sledgehammer. Hey, Jimbo, give me the hammer. No, not that one, the sledge.
Oh, Mr. America.
Yeah.
American.
Idiot.
Great in Gremlins.
So as when you get to the ending, what's great is that this is not the only movie, but that there's a real satellite dish that is enormous. It's like, a football field across. This one, I think it's in Puerto Rico, but they used it in a couple of different movies. No, in the movie it's in Cuba, but the real one is in Cuba.
They fooled him.
Got him.
What?
What? Movies are lies.
Let me turn my brain back on.
And I loved. So they get there, and by the time they've gotten there in the movie, Bond should have died like 11 times. And it's like what you were saying earlier about turn your brain off. It's like, because if you're trying to watch it as a realistic movie, you would have to do what my dumbass was doing the whole time I'm watching, where I'm just like, okay, so he shouts, like someone says, oh, there he is. They show him a picture of Bond sneaking in, and he says, kill him. And they find him, but they don't kill him. They capture him and bring him in. And the guy who said kill him starts talking to him, giving him lots of time to like escape and come up with a plan. They knock him out with a cart and then strap him into the helicopter and then set the helicopter on a nice long timer to blow up. And it's like, this is this classic thing that we joke about with Bond movies. Why wouldn't you shoot him and put his body in the helicopter? There's just, the whole movie is that. And so it's like, you better settle in because Bond will not die. So just
I'm still picturing Hugh Grant as Bond in this, and just thinking.
See, I'm still picturing Mel Gibson, but one of the Bond girls being Donald Glover. I'm getting too old for this shit.
Gibson doing Danny Glover. Gibson doing his like Scottish accent from Braveheart.
So also going back to how far away this was from other Bonds, this definitely resonated with people. So 6 years doesn't seem like a lot, but I hadn't looked at. I don't have any recollection of the next three with Pierce Brosnan. I remember the last Pierce Brosnan coming out and advertises Pierce Brosnan's last James Bond. I'm like, man, I've been done with that since Goldeneye. Like, yeah, it was peaked out. So like, I don't know. And like the new Daniel Craig ones, I like. Like, I know I saw Casino Royale. I know I've probably seen most of the other.
Quantum of Solace.
I think I've seen them all, but like, I also don't run to the theater.
Casino Royale was the same director, Martin Campbell, as Goldeneye.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And then Mendes did, I think, the next one. Yeah, I mean, so I think with the new ones, it's always changing, and I think that's what at some point someone with the Bond franchise realized, like, all right, we can't just keep making the same thing. They have to change over time. They have to adapt. And I was thinking too, like it's always a guy. I saw one of Pierce Brosnan's quotes. When he worked on Miss Doubtfire with Christopher Columbus, Columbus is like, dude, you should play James Bond. And Brosnan, he's like, that ship sailed for me. That, and I'm going like, there's no way he's too old, because if this guy is too young, no one believes that he's got any experience at all. Like, I get, it's like finding the perfect age range there where it's like still like you believably like fit and stuff, but at the same time, it's like, has seen a bunch of crap. Like, he's been through it.
Yeah.
And that's what I think the new ones, I guess you could say they're like grittier. They're more grounded for a James Bond movie. Like, there's not as much in the new ones where we go like, it's more, they're a little more plot heavy. And I guess they're geared more towards, we talked about how this one came out in 95. The other movies that came out in 95, not major, thinkers, Waterworld, you don't really have to put your thinking cap on and watch that one. They're pretty simple. Well, but now, like, what people want is like the Christopher Nolan effect, maybe. Once you read the opening of Waterworld, it's like, yeah, that's pretty much it. You're trying to not find
the Waterworld stunt spectacular at Universal has more plot than the actual movie. There's a lot of stuff in this movie that if you were trying to take it seriously, it wouldn't work. By the end, you were alluding to it, Hudacs. It's like it's insane at the end when they finally fall off the helicopter. But he's already killed the villain, but he still has to do the hanging on to the bottom of the helicopter thing because you have to do it once a movie, I guess. Yeah. So they fall into a field and they're having this romantic, he just killed his best friend, but hey, maybe let's get down, it'll be some and Joe Don Baker shows up, the CIA guy, and then there's like, I thought, was this supposed to be helpful? And he goes, hey, Marines, and all the Marines in their ghillie suits just pop up out of nowhere, and I'm like, and by the way, the helicopters also fall in instantly, like you couldn't hear them or see them, and it's like, and it was like, wait a minute, they were there the whole time? Doing what? Just hanging out in the grass?
I wonder if the main financier for the studio for this movie is like an oil guy in Houston. He's like, we need to represent America. Let them know we were there too.
It was so unnecessary because it made no sense. Like, why did you deploy the Marines into a foreign country, into Cuba? But they didn't do anything. They were just kind of there. And it was like,
because America is always the cavalry. Unless James Bond needed it, we're there in the last 5 minutes of the film. We're
never throw the first punch.
No.
Clean up afterwards.
Yeah.
Well, do you guys have any final thoughts on Goldeneye?
We never talked because the other one big thing in any James Bond is the opening song. Yeah. And we didn't talk about that.
Yeah.
This is Aretha Franklin doing...
Is it Aretha? Tina Turner.
It's not Aretha Franklin.
Must be somebody else.
Good God.
Look, I'm watching The Masked Singer. I can't guess anybody.
I'm glad we got that Jim, though. Glad you didn't save your final thought.
What are you drinking? What is that?
Wait, I think it was they wanted the Rolling Stones to do it.
My martini.
Tina Turner did it, but it was written by the U2 guys, I think.
Oh, okay. Yeah, the idea is to try to make it a hit or whatever, and I didn't necessarily love it all, but it was
Aretha Franklin.
There's no excuse for you.
Well, guys,
I'm good on my
thanks
end.
for having me on.
Yeah, thanks for coming on.
No, I'm actually very happy that you guys. I'm glad that you guys called me because the last time you did, it was for a stakeout, and that did not end too well.
No.
So I'm very happy that you called me.
That's a whole nother podcast. If you've listened this much, thanks for joining us again the second time this week. Please subscribe, rate us if you have time. If you want to check out some other episodes, it'd be awesome. We're gonna keep firing these things out. So
guys, I'm sure
there's plenty of stuff, but everything we watch, we're making this so everything's free streaming online. Given the nature of everyone being stuck at home, especially right now, this won't age very well next year. But we're all at home, and so all this stuff that we're watching is free online that we want to watch and talk about it. So hopefully you guys are watching and enjoying this as well.
Yeah.
Did we lose Matt Clay?
I don't. His face is just kind of
frozen. His video's frozen.
But he's happy.
Well, for film Flashback, Matthew Clay has left us. I'm Nick Holmes. Our friend Matt Hudacs joined us today, guys. Thanks so much for watching, and we'll see you next time.
All right, take it easy.